Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. How was your day? I hope all of you are fine. Okay, let us introduce ourselves. We are from Group 7. My name is Firdausiyah and my partner, Putri Saraswati. Today, we are going to present about general concept of auxiliary verbs and mood and modality. The first topic is the general concept of auxiliary verbs. A general definition of auxiliary verb can be given along the following lines. Auxiliary verbs form a small subclass of verbs whose members are characteristically used to mark tense, aspect, mood, or voice. Next, an auxiliary verbs. Auxiliary verbs help the main verb and is also called helping verbs. The action happening in the past or happening in the present or will happen in the future. Auxiliary verbs are verbs that add functional or grammatical meaning to the clause in which they occur. Auxiliary verb cannot stand alone without a verb. In a clause or sentence, this auxiliary verb usually comes before the main verb. The main auxiliary verbs are to be, to have, and to do. They appear in the following forms. Auxiliary verbs are used with a main verb to help express the main verb tense, mood, or voice. Examples of auxiliary verbs expressing tense. In these examples, the main verbs are in bold and the auxiliary verbs are underlined. The first example is, she was waiting for an hour. In each of these examples, the auxiliary verb to help to form the progressive tense, which is the tense used for ongoing action. The second example is, she had drunk it before we arrived. In each of these examples, the auxiliary verb to have helps to form the perfect tense, which is the tense used for expressing an action completion. The last example is, she had been studying before the incident. In each of these examples, the auxiliary verbs have and been help to form the perfect progressive tense, which is the sentence used for expressing an ongoing action's completion. Examples of auxiliary verbs expressing mood. Here are some examples of auxiliary verbs being used to express mood. The first, did you win? The auxiliary verb to do is used to form the interrogative mood, to ask a question. And the second is, don't forget your wallet. Here, the auxiliary verb to do, in its negative form, is used to form the imperative mood, to give an order. Example of auxiliary verbs expressing voice. Here are some examples of auxiliary verbs expressing voice. The first, our dessert was eaten by the dog. And the second, the geese are driven through the snake. The third, the phone will be disconnected tomorrow. In these examples, the auxiliary verb to help to form the passive voice. A verb said to be in the passive voice when its subject doesn't perform the action of the verb, but has the action down to it. The last is example of auxiliary verbs expressing aspect. There are two kinds auxiliary verbs expressing aspect. First, perfect aspect. Second, progressive aspect. Perfect aspect menunjukkan bahwa suatu aksi terjadi di masa lampau namun berhubungan dengan waktu setelahnya. Aspect ini dibentuk oleh auxiliary verb have, has, had plus past participle have or has pada present tense and had pada past tense. And the second, progressive aspect, yang dibentuk dari kombinasi auxiliary verb be and present participle am, is, are pada present tense and was a verb pada past tense, menunjukkan bahwa suatu aksi berlangsung selama periode waktu yang terbatas. The next subject is modal auxiliary verb. Modal auxiliary verbs are a special kind of helping verb. A modal verb helps the main verb to express the mood of the subject. There are several kinds of modal verb. Those are can, may, must, and will for present form and could, might, should for past form.
Hello everyone, my name is Putri Saraswati. In this presentation, we will discuss about mood and modality. Grammatical mood, also known as mode, refers to the quality or form of a verb in a sentence. More specifically, mood denotes the tone of a verb in a sentence, so the intention of the writer or speaker is clear. When considering mood in grammar, there are 5 basic types: conditional, imperative, indicative, interrogative, and subjunctive. Okay, let's take a closer look at each verb form. A sentence with a conditional mood contains an auxiliary verb or a helping verb and a main verb. You will be able to spot the conditional mood if you see the auxiliary verbs would or should. They will support the main verb. Common examples include would like or should have. Another telltale sign of the conditional mood is the if this, then that construct. If or then clearly indicates one action is dependent upon another. For example, if she was not so mean, then he would have helped her. Okay, here are a few more examples of the conditional mood. The second type is imperative mood. A sentence with an imperative mood makes a request or a command. The sentences don't make mild suggestion. Rather, they issue direct command telling someone what to do. In these sentences, the verb will express a direct call to action. Sometimes the subject you will be understood, as in the first example. Other times it will be clear who the subject is. Here are some examples of the imperative mood. Okay, the third type is indicative mood. A sentence with an indicative mood expresses a factual statement, at least from the perspective of the speaker. Most sentences are written in the indicative mood, sharing facts or details that we perceive to be correct. And in these sentences, the verb will express some sort of action as a statement of fact. And here are some examples of the indicative mood. Interrogative mode. A sentence with an interrogative mode asks a question. It expresses a sense of uncertainty. This may make you think of interrogative sentences which also ask a question. When dealing with the interrogative mode, there will typically be 2 verbs. One will be an auxiliary verb. Again, you can think of an auxiliary verb as a helping verb to the main verb. It provides further clarification for the main verb of the sentence. Common auxiliary verb include are, be, do, and have. In sentences with an interrogative mood, the auxiliary verb will often come before the subject of the sentence. And then here are some examples of the interrogative mood. The last, subjunctive mood. A sentence with a subjunctive mood expresses a condition that is doubtful, hypothetical, wishful, or not factual. The subjunctive verb in the sentences will show action, but it will be dependent upon some other action or indicative, which is where you will find the doubt or questioning. A great way to spot sentences written in the subjunctive mood is to note clauses beginning with if. Then you will clearly notice that the verb tend to express a doubt, wish, request, demand, proposal, or hypothetical situation. Here are some examples of the subjunctive mood. We continue on modality. Modality deals with speaker's attitude toward a state of affairs. It is to be understood as a semantic category which covers such notions as possibility, probability, necessity, volition, obligation, and permission. There are three main families of meanings that the modal's auxiliaries express: epistemic, deontic, and dynamic. The first, epistemic. The epistemic based on the Greek word for knowledge. The epistemic meaning is used by a speaker to assess the possibility, probability, or other ways of a state of affairs according to the speaker's limited knowledge or belief. An unmodalized utterance by contrast states a plain fact or assertion. For example, he may be ill is typically example of possibility. The second, that will be the postman, is typically example of probability. Okay, the second is deontic. The deontic based on the Greek word for obligation. The speaker brings about an action using models to express different degrees of obligation, advisability, or permission. Let's continue to the example. You can come here if you wish is typical example of giving permission. The second, can you pass the salt please, is typical example of a request. Dynamic modality concern to the properties and disposition of person referred to in the clause, especially by the subject. I am sorry for the mistyping of word. For example of dynamic, Usain can run faster than everyone else. Can is used to express the ability. The second, I asked Jack to leave, but he won't. Will in this example shows that Jack lacked willingness.